Thank you very much for joining us. It's just after 10 GMT, and we start this news hour with the war in Ukraine. The commander of Ukraine's ground forces says his troops are advancing on the Russian-occupied city of Bakhmut. Footage just released by Ukraine's army appears to show Russian positions under fire near the eastern city. Moscow's forces declared victory there last month. And Russia says, meanwhile, that it stopped a major Ukrainian offensive elsewhere in the eastern Donetsk region. Those reports have not been independently verified, but Moscow has released pictures, it says, show some of the fighting. Pro-Ukrainian forces, meanwhile, have launched a raid in the Russian border region of Belgorod. One of the groups involved, the Russian Volunteer Corps, says it captured several Russian soldiers. Kyiv is denying involvement. In a moment, we'll be speaking to journalist Yulia Shapovalova in Moscow. But first, we go to Charles Stratford in Kyiv. Charlie, a very complicated picture of the front lines. Tell us about what you're hearing is happening in Bakhmut and elsewhere in the Donetsk region.
Well, it's very difficult to get any kind of independent verification about these claims being made by both the Russians and the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are saying that they've made a few gains, we understand, to the south of Bakhmut. But what we also know is that the vast majority of that town is very much under the control of Russian forces. I think more interestingly are these claims that are being made by Russian forces that Ukrainians made an attempt at an advance in what they say was 5 sectors of southern Donetsk. Again, no reaction from the Ukrainian side in relation to that claim, but if anything, the Ukrainians have launched a campaign of silence in recent days and weeks. They released a video, the Ukrainian military released a video showing Ukrainian soldiers bringing their fingers to their lips, saying that the public and the military, many of whom actually post their movements sometimes on social platforms like TikTok, to keep quiet. We understand, though, that the timing of these claims is salient because, of course, it was only a couple of days ago that the leader of this country, President Volodymyr Zelensky, said that the counteroffensive was about to start, or that they were ready to start it. The Russians, on their part, have released video showing a green field and what seems to be military vehicles being hit in that field. We can't independently verify whether, in fact, those vehicles were Ukrainians or indeed Russians. But I also think that it's important to recognise that if indeed this claim by the Russians is true and that this move was made by the Ukrainians trying to push south through southern Donetsk, then that is consistent with what we've been hearing with military analysts over the last weeks and months building up to this counteroffensive, and that is that they expect Ukrainian forces to push south through Zaporizhia and southern Donetsk in order to try and reach the Azov Sea. And what that would do would basically cut off this so-called land bridge between Russian-occupied areas of Donetsk and Lugansk in the north with Russian-occupied Crimea. But as I say, it's almost impossible to get any kind of independent verification of these claims and counterclaims by both sides. So
no official confirmation of whether this is the start of this long-awaited Ukrainian counteroffensive. What challenges do the Ukrainians face, Charlie, when it comes to this counteroffensive?
Well, there are huge challenges ahead, and that's not lost on the leadership of this country as well. In fact, President Zelensky has said as much. But military analysts will tell you that some of the most important things that they're concerned about is just how thinly, for example, so much of this Western military equipment, or military equipment from allies, could be spread along a front line that is around about 1,000 kilometres long. They also talk about the length of time that this counteroffensive, or preparations for this counteroffensive, has given Russian forces to thoroughly dig in and defend their positions. They also talk about the kind of change in strategy that is going to be needed in order to launch a major counteroffensive. They talk about something called sequential movement. Now, up until now, the Ukrainians have been using heavy artillery, for example, and what limited air power they have to strike Russian targets before then moving infantry forward. Analysts say that there needs to be far more of a simultaneous, complex military move in any major counteroffensive. and whether, in fact, the Ukrainians are ready for that remains to be seen. And just to give you an indication of the kind of risks that the Ukrainians are facing in fighting on that front line, then analysts will tell you that the kill ratio is always very much in favour of the defenders obviously being the Russians in this instance, and that kill ratio is around 3-1. So there are huge challenges that the Ukrainians will face when this counter-offensive eventually starts.
Charlie, thank you very much for that. Charles Stratford, live for us there in Kyiv. Let's get the view now from Moscow and speak to journalist Yulia Shapovalova. Yulia, what are the Russians saying about what's happening on the front lines in Ukraine?
So the situation seems to be very complicated indeed. Now I'm talking about the Donetsk direction as well as the city of Bakhmut. We've been getting reports here about some heavy attacks and the large advance by the Ukrainian army in several directions in the Donetsk region. And the Russian forces have repelled a major Ukrainian offensive in the southern Ukrainian region around Donetsk and Ugledar. The situation escalated, first of all, near Ugledar, where reports about heavy fighting there right now. The Ukrainians managed to enter the outskirts in the village of Novodonetskoye. Several other villages were also attacked in the Donetsk direction. But according to the Russian side, well, the Ukrainians actually couldn't achieve success in that direction. And having lost people and several pieces of equipment, the Ukrainians rolled back.
And there have been attacks, Yulia, inside Russia. Tell us about what's been happening in the Belgorod region and who are these fighters who are infiltrating Russia from Ukraine?
Well, earlier there were reports about the Liberty of Russia Legion as well as the volunteer corps, the Russian volunteer corps that penetrated into the territory of the Russian Federation of the Belgorod region that borders Ukraine. So basically those legions, those groupings, they are claiming that they want to free Russia. And at the moment, of course, the main focus is on the border region of Belgorod right now, because it is the hardest hit region right now. So in the morning, the Ukrainian army fired more than 70 shells from the Grad multiple launch rocket systems, and they attacked the village of Nove Travalzhanka in the border with the Shebekino and the Belgorod region. That, according to the head of the Shebekino district. And locals say the town of Shebekino has literally been wiped off the face of the earth. And right now there is no electricity, water or mobile phone service in the city. And a number of shops have been looted. And many people say that they don't have any savings to run away from there and settle in other parts of the country. And therefore, they rely on the help from the government, from the state. Some people have been taken to temporary accommodation centres. And basically they complain about the conditions at those centres as well.
Yulia, thank you very much for that. Yulia Shapovalova live there in Moscow.